The world of the Ice Age was a place both majestic and merciless, a stage of endless white horizons where survival itself was the greatest challenge. Imagine a landscape where glaciers loom like frozen walls against the sky, where bitter winds swept across open plains with the sharpness of knives, and where every night brought with the possibility of death. In such an unforgiving world, early humans struggled not simply to live day by day, but often hour by hour, fighting against the primal forces of nature that sought to extinguish their fragile spark of life. It was a time when the earth seemed to be gripped by a perpetual winter, with temperatures dropping far below freezing and snow burying the land under heavy silence. The long nights could stretch endlessly, with only the faint glow of moonlight reflecting on the icy crust. To the cavemen who lived through these centuries of relentless cold, the darkness itself was a kind of predator, an invisible force that stole body heat, drained strength, and left people trembling and vulnerable. Survival in these conditions meant more than having food and shelter. It meant understanding the cold as an enemy, learning to read it, outwit it, and sometimes endure it with sheer determination. In this stark battle between warmth and death, the human body was at a severe disadvantage. Unlike the thick-furred mammoths or saber-toothed cats, humans were clothed only in thin skin and whatever scraps of hide they could gather from their kills. They lacked the natural insulation of the animals that surrounded them. Every shiver was a reminder of fragility, every frostbitten finger a warning of how close death always lingered. Yet within this vulnerability was also the seed of human ingenuity, the ability to adapt, to imagine solutions, and to manipulate the environment in ways that no other creature could. One of the most remarkable examples of this ingenuity was the creation of sleeping pits. At first glance, a shallow depression in the earth may seem too simple to be called a survival invention, but within the context of Ice Age winters, it was a revelation. By digging into the ground, early humans discovered they could harness the earth itself as insulation, using soil and snow as barriers against the killing cold. Lined with firs, grasses, or branches, these pits transformed into cocoons of trapped heat, where families could huddle together and share their body warmth. In these humble depressions, lives were saved and generations endured. The sleeping pit was more than a hole in the ground. It was a statement of resilience, an answer to nature's brutal question. Do you have the will to live through the night? In the silence of the blizzard, while the outside world was hostile and merciless, the pit became a sanctuary. Flames crackled in nearby fires. Shadows danced on cave walls, and children pressed close to their parents in protective embrace of heat and shelter. Each dawn that followed was a victory. Each sunrise proof that the pit had worked, that human determination had triumphed once again over extinction. This documentary will journey into that forgotten world, unraveling the methods and psychology of Ice Age survival. We will explore how cavemen faced not only physical challenges, the biting wind, the scarcity of food, the prowling predators, but also the invisible weight of fear, the emotional toll of endless cold, and the ever-present awareness of death. We will discover how the simple act of digging into the earth became one of humanity's most vital strategies against one of the harshest climates the planet has ever known. The story of the sleeping pit is not just about prehistoric technology. It is about the courage of communities who stood on the edge of extinction yet refused to give in. It is about the timeless struggle of human beings to transform weakness into strength, to find warmth in the middle of desolation, and to carry forward the fragile flame of life into a brighter future. As we step into the shadows of the Ice Age, let's imagine ourselves there, crouched in the cold, staring into the abyss of night, and realizing that even in the bleakest conditions, humans found a way to endure. The Ice Age was a landscape carved by ice and dominated by silence. Across vast stretches of Eurasia and North America, colossal glaciers tower like frozen fortresses, grinding slowly across the land and reshaping valleys and rivers. These sheets of ice, some thousands of feet thick, reflected sunlight in a dazzling glare by day and loomed as cold pale walls by night. Between these frozen giants lay tundras and wind-swept plains, where the earth was locked in frost and snow blanketed the ground for most of the year. To exist here meant inhabiting a world that seemed more dead than alive, yet hidden within this desolation were the delicate threads of survival that humans desperately clung to. For the cavemen who lived in this frozen theater, every step outside their shelter was a negotiation with death. The ground was treacherous, the air thin and biting, and food scarce. Storms could descend without warning, burying paths and erasing landmarks under white sheets, leaving hunters disoriented and vulnerable. The environment was not just cold. It was hostile, relentless, and indifferent to the struggles of those who dared to live within it. In this world of extremes, each day of survival felt temporary, always balanced on the edge of collapse. Yet the Ice Age was not entirely devoid of life. It was also an age of giants. Herds of mammoths trudged across the steppes, their woolly coats and curved tusks embodying resilience against the cold. Reindeer and bison migrated in long trains across the snowy plains, their movements signaling the promise of food for hunters who could track them. But for every prey animal there were predators. Saber-toothed cats lurking in the shadows, cave lions prowling the edges of human settlements, and wolves weaving silently through the snow. These beasts were rivals for meat and territory, making survival a daily contest of strength, cunning, and endurance. The presence of these animals added to the constant tension of Ice Age life. Humans were not apex predators in this setting. They were participants in a larger, dangerous cycle. To chase after prey meant risking becoming prey themselves. To camp in the open meant attracting hungry predators drawn by the scent of smoke or food. Even within caves or shelters, safety was never absolute. In many ways, humans were fragile interlopers in an ecosystem designed for creatures far more naturally adapted to the cold. This vulnerability forced them to develop not only new strategies of hunting and defense, but also methods of psychological endurance. The sheer scale of the Ice Age environment also shaped how people lived. Migration became essential as groups followed the herds, seeking pockets of abundance amidst the scarcity. Rivers and valleys provided temporary lifelines, offering fresh water and corridors for movement. Caves carved into limestone cliffs became sanctuaries, their stone walls offering protection from storms and a canvas for early art that captured both the beauty and terror of the world outside. Each place humans settled bore the marks of struggle, abandoned hearths, scattered bones, tools worn down by use. These traces tell us today how difficult and precarious life truly was. The contrast of this world was stark and unforgiving. Beauty and danger existed side by side. The glitter of ice under the sun was breathtaking, but it concealed the possibility of frostbite within minutes. A herd of mammoths represented life-giving meat and fur, yet hunting them could cost lives if a single charge trampled hunters. The silence of the snow brought moments of peace, yet also echoed with the loneliness of small tribes cut off from one another, separated by miles of desolate terrain. Every moment was a balance between awe at the raw grandeur of nature and fear of the lethal challenges it imposed. It was within the severe backdrop that the invention of survival techniques, such as sleeping pits, emerged. When we imagine those shallow depressions lined with grass and hides, it is impossible to separate them from the greater environment that demanded such creativity. Without the crushing cold, without the constant threat of storms and predators, there would have been no need to dig into the earth for warmth. The pits themselves are symbols of adaptation to a world that seemed determined to extinguish fragile human lives. They remind us that survival was not only a test of individual strength, but of collective resilience, of communities learning to bend but not break in the face of overwhelming odds. The world of ice and stone was not simply a background. It was the crucible in which humanity was forged. To survive here meant to innovate, to cooperate, and to endure. Each cave dweller who saw another sunrise was a testament to the possibility of life in a world where death seemed inevitable. This environment shaped the human story, molding not only bodies but minds, pushing creativity, memory, and culture into new forms. In its merciless silence, the Ice Age gave birth to the ingenuity that still defines us today. The human body, though remarkable in its adaptability, was never designed for the full brutality of the Ice Age winter. Unlike the mammoth with its shaggy coat or the reindeer with its insulating hide, our prehistoric ancestors entered this frozen arena with nothing more than bare skin stretched over fragile bones and muscles. The body could generate heat through movement and food, but without protection, it lost warmth quickly. Every breath expelled into the night was a tiny cloud of heat wasted, and every gust of wind stole warmth from exposed flesh. In an environment where temperatures plummeted to levels that could freeze water in minutes, the body itself became the greatest battlefield, and cold was the most persistent enemy. Hypothermia was a constant shadow hanging over Ice Age humanity. When the body's core temperature dipped below survival levels, confusion set in, followed by weakness and finally a slow and numbing descent toward death. To prevent this, humans relied heavily on constant movement, huddling together, and using every available resource to insulate themselves from the bitter air. But even with these strategies, the body was fragile. Fingers and toes blackened with frostbite, ears stiffened, and skin cracked under the relentless assault of freezing winds. The very biology of humans made the winters an ongoing war, fought every hour against forces far stronger than themselves. Shivering was the body's automatic weapon, a desperate attempt to generate heat through muscle contractions. Yet shivering alone was never enough to sustain warmth through long nights. Cavemen needed more calories, more shelter, more strategies to prevent their own flesh from becoming brittle with ice. To lose warmth was to invite exhaustion, and once exhaustion set in, even the simplest survival task became impossible. A hunter too cold to grip, his spear was a hunter destined to starve. A mother unable to keep her child warm was forced to watch life slip away in silence. This was the cruel contrast of Ice Age existence. While the human mind was capable of innovation and imagination, the human body remained painfully vulnerable. Where a wolf could curl into its fur or a bear retreat into a den to hibernate, humans had to craft their own solutions. The body's shortcomings demanded tools, demanded fire, demanded layers of hide sewn together with bone needles. Even the act of eating became tied to warmth. Food was not just fuel for muscles, but fuel for body heat. Every bite of meat meant the body could resist the cold just a little longer. Hunger and cold were twin enemies, always striking together. Children and the elderly were especially at risk, their smaller or weaker bodies unable to retain heat as effectively as the strong hunters. Families learned quickly that survival was not individual, but collective. The warmth of many bodies pressed close together could mean the difference between life and death. It was within this need for shared warmth that sleeping pits became such a vital innovation. By trapping body heat in an enclosed space, humans could strengthen the body's fragile defenses against cold, creating microclimates where their biology stood a fighting chance. The earth, which might have seemed unyielding and lifeless, became an ally, a shield against the wind, a wall to slow the loss of heat, a silent partner in the fight for survival. The psychological effects of cold were as dangerous as the physical. To be cold for too long was to lose hope, to feel the creeping despair that sapped energy even faster than hunger. Cold seeped into bones and minds alike, wearing down resolve. Stories from anthropological studies of modern survivors in cold regions show how quickly morale can break when warmth is gone. For Ice Age humans, this struggle was magnified by isolation, by the long nights of darkness where only the glow of fire stood between them and hopelessness. The body could not be trusted to endure alone, and so the mind was forced to find strength in ritual, in belief, in the hope that dawn would come again. The battle between the body and the winter chill was therefore never-ending, fought on many fronts at once. Through ingenuity, through cooperation, through sheer willpower. And yet, despite their fragility, humans survived. Their bodies, though weak compared to predators around them, were paired with a mind that constantly sought solutions. The sleeping pit, the carefully tended fire, the fur stretched across shoulders, all of these were extensions of the body's desperate fight to hold on to heat. Each adaptation was a declaration. The body may be vulnerable, but together with invention, it could outlast even the coldest nights. In this way, the Ice Age forged humanity not by hardening their bodies into beasts, but by forcing them to use their frailty as a spark for ingenuity. The weakness of human skin became the mother of clothing, the loss of body heat the inspiration for shelter, the threat of cold death the reason for fire. The very limitations of the human body gave rise to the survival strategies that would define the species. The winter chill was a merciless teacher, but its lessons became the foundation of endurance. To survive the Ice Age was to think differently, to take nothing for granted, and to use every scrap of the environment as a tool against death. Among the most ingenious of all prehistoric survival strategies was the sleeping pit, a shallow depression dug into the ground, lined with natural materials, and transformed into a pocket of warmth in a world where cold ruled mercilessly. At first glance, it may seem primitive, even trivial, to carve a hollow into the earth. But for cavemen who faced nights when temperatures plunged far below freezing, it was a stroke of brilliance, a simple act that turned inhospitable ground into a sanctuary. The concept behind the sleeping pit was rooted in observation. Early humans would have noticed how animals endured the winter. Wolves curled into dugout dens, bears retreated into caves, and smaller creatures burrowed under snow and earth to preserve their heat. By mimicking these natural strategies, cavemen began to reshape their relationship with the land. A pit was more than just a hole. It was insulation, protection, and a trap for the most valuable resource of all, body heat. Unlike the open air, where warmth was stolen by the wind, a depression in the soil sheltered heat, held it close, and allowed people to survive nights that otherwise might have ended in silent, frozen death. The construction of a pit required both effort and knowledge. A group might scrape at frozen ground with stone tools, digging just deep enough to form a hollow that could contain their bodies. Once the earth was shaped, they lined it with whatever materials were at hand: dry grasses, pine needles, moss, branches, or animal hides. These layers added softness, but more importantly served as insulation, keeping the cold earth from sapping warmth from their flesh. Over this, they might drape heavy furs taken from hunted prey, forming a cocoon where family members could huddle together. The result was a crude but effective bed, one that transformed survival from a gamble into a possibility. The effectiveness of the pit lay not just in its physical structure, but in the collective warmth of those who occupied it. Humans, when pressed close together, radiate heat, each body contributing to a shared reservoir of warmth. In an open cave or beneath the stars, this heat would quickly vanish into the air. In a pit, it was captured and reflected back. A small group of people could raise the temperature of their confined space significantly, creating a microclimate shielded from the deadly cold outside. In many ways, the sleeping pit became the prehistoric equivalent of a blanket fort, a humble yet powerful example of ingenuity rooted in necessity. The emotional impact of the pit was just as important as the physical. Imagine the terror of lying exposed to the freezing night, the sound of wolves howling in the distance, the icy wind scraping across bare skin. Now imagine slipping into a shallow hollow, pulling furs tight, feeling the warmth of family press against you, and knowing that at least for this night, you had a chance. The pit offered not just heat, but measure of safety, a psychological barrier against despair. It transformed the hostile night into something survivable, giving cavemen the courage to face dawn again. Anthropologists believe that sleeping pits were often dug inside larger shelters, such as caves or huts made from mammoth bones and hides. This combination created a layered defense. The outer shelter broke the wind and trapped firelight, while the pit preserved the warmth of bodies themselves. Together, these strategies reflected an evolving understanding of the environment. Humans were not merely reacting to the cold. They were engineering solutions, stacking defenses, and slowly mastering the art of survival in conditions that seemed unlivable. One can imagine the scene vividly. A family returns from a long day of foraging or hunting, the sun already sinking below the icy horizon. Inside a cave, the father kneels down, scraping away dirt with flat stone, carving out a shallow trench. Children gather dry grasses, stuffing them into the hollow, while the mother arranges hides along the edges. As the fire nearby flickers, they crawl into the pit together, pulling furs across their shoulders. The children whisper, comforted by the closeness, while the parents keep a watchful eye on the flames. Outside, snow drives against the rock. Wolves stalk unseen through the dark. Inside the pit, warmth builds, and for a few hours, the family is safe. Sleeping pits, in their simplicity, highlight the defining trait of humanity, the ability to see beyond immediate weakness and invent solutions that extend life. They were not grand monuments or tools of conquest, but quiet innovations born of desperation that gave humans an edge in their struggle against the cold. Without such ingenuity, many groups may not have survived long winters, and the thread of human history itself might have been severed. The birth of the sleeping pit was thus a turning point in prehistoric life. It was not merely about surviving a single night, but about passing on knowledge, teaching children how to dig, how to line, how to preserve warmth. It was a tradition of survival, a piece of cultural memory as vital as hunting skills or fire-making. Each pit dug into the ground was a silent testament to human resilience, a refusal to surrender to the cold, a declaration that even the earth itself could be shaped into an ally. If the sleeping pit was a shield against the cold, then fire was a sword. It was the most powerful ally the caveman had in the eternal war against the Ice Age winter. Fire meant warmth, light, protection, and a sense of control over an otherwise merciless world. For humans who dug pits to trap their body heat, the glow of flames nearby elevated that survival tactic into something far greater. A pit can serve the fragile warmth of bodies, but fire created heat of its own, surrounding the camp with life-giving energy. The two together, pit and flame, were the difference between shivering on the edge of death and sleeping through the night with a chance at dawn. The mastery of fire was not a simple achievement. In many cases, it was a daily battle. Early humans carried embers from one site to another, cradled carefully in bark or bone containers, because creating flame from scratch was often a laborious process. Rubbing sticks together, striking flint against pyrite, or blowing sparks into dry tinder required patience and persistence. Failure meant facing the cold with nothing but hides and pits, while success meant safety, nourishment, and hope. To lose fire in the middle of a winter night was not a minor inconvenience. It could be a death sentence. That is why so many tribes guarded their flames like a sacred treasure, keeping watch to ensure the embers never went dark. Once lit, fire transformed the entire atmosphere of shelter. The flickering glow pushed back the oppressive blackness of the Ice Age night, creating a circle of safety where shadows dance across cave walls. In this fragile sphere of light, predators hesitated. Wolves lingered at the edges of vision, uncertain whether to advance. The fire itself became a guardian, one that stood silently between a family and the dark unknown. When combined with a sleeping pit, fire created layers of protection. The earth held in body heat, while the flames added radiant warmth and psychological security. Even a small fire could mean the difference between freezing silence and the crackle of life. The practical benefits of fire extended far beyond warmth. Flames allowed cavemen to dry damp furs and hides, to cook meat, so that it yielded more nutrients and hardened wooden tools into stronger weapons. But in winter especially, fire became the center of survival. It dried out the damp grasses and mosses used to line sleeping pits, preventing mold and rot. It allowed people to sit close, warm their limbs, and then retreat into pits already filled with trapped heat. In this way, fire and pit complemented each other. One created an external source of energy. The other captured and preserved what little heat the human body could generate. The rituals around fire reveal how deeply it mattered. Archaeological evidence suggests that cavemen arranged stones in circles to contain flames, or dug hearths into the floors of caves, carefully managing smoke and airflow. The effort invested shows reverence, as if fire was more than a tool. It was companion, a spirit, and in truth, it was. Around the fire, stories were told, knowledge passed down, songs and chants performed. Children learned the dangers of the cold by watching the flames, and elders shared the secrets of survival while their faces glowed in the firelight. Fire was warmth, but it was also culture, memory, and identity. Imagine such a night. Outside, the storm howls, snow piling at the cave's mouth. Inside, the fire burns low, throwing red light across the stone walls. A shallow pit lies nearby, lined with grasses and furs, where a family is pressed close together. Their breath rises in the dim air, mixing with the smoke drifting toward the cave ceiling. The pit holds their warmth like a vessel. The fire strengthens it. And together these two inventions form a fragile bubble of life surrounded by endless cold. A child, half asleep, stirs in the pit and hears the pop of the fire. The sound is reassuring, a promise that the night will not claim them. For the parents, watching embers carefully, the fire's glow is not just comfort, it is survival embodied. The duality of fire was never forgotten. It brought warmth but also risk. Flames could burn hides, consume precious wood, or choke a shelter with smoke if managed poorly. A fire left unattended could die, and with it, the chances of making it through the night. To live by fire was to accept constant responsibility, a vigilance that became ingrained in human behavior. This need for constant tending may have even shaped the rhythms of social life. Some took turns watching the flames, others gathered fuel, and together the group ensured that their greatest protector was never lost. When paired with the earth itself, the sleeping pit, fire became part of a layered strategy of survival. One was passive, conserving what heat existed, while the other was active, generating new warmth. Together, they mirrored the balance of human survival itself. Endurance and innovation, protection and power, fragility and resilience. Without pits, fire's warmth might vanish into the air. Without fire, the pit might not provide enough to save a freezing family. But together, they created a system that carried humanity across millennia of winters. The image of cavemen curled in pits warmed by firelight speaks to a deeper truth. Survival was not about one great invention, but about many small acts of brilliance, combined to form a tapestry of endurance. Fire gave cavemen the courage to face the night, while pits gave them the endurance to live until morning. The union of flame and earth was one of humanity's first triumphs over nature's merciless cold, a reminder that even the weakest of creatures, armed with imagination, could reshape the balance of life and death. In the endless winters of the Ice Age, a pit dug into the earth or a fire burning against the darkness was not enough on its own. People needed walls around them, barriers to hold back the blizzards, and roofs to stop the sky's frozen breath from settling on their skin. The caveman's ingenuity revealed itself most clearly in the shelters he built, ranging from a vast protection of natural caves to the ingenious construction of mammoth bone dwellings and the flexible hides stretched into tents. Each form of shelter reflected the raw resources of an environment, the pressing need for warmth, an eternal struggle against the winter night. Caves were the first and perhaps the most powerful refuge. They offered a ready-made shield, walls of stone that resisted the wind and snow, chambers where fires could burn without being scattered by storms. Archaeologists have found evidence of soot-stained ceilings, proving that ancient people transformed these dark places into homes. Yet caves were not simply cold holes in the rock. The cavemen lined the floors with grasses, moss, and hides, carving shallow depressions into the earth for sleeping pits. Within these walls, the pits absorbed the warmth of bodies, the fire reflected off stone surfaces, and the entire space became a pocket of survival carved out of the unforgiving wild. Imagine a winter night where icy gales scream across the valley. Yet deep inside the cave, the glow of fire flickers against limestone walls, illuminating families curled in pits lined with fur, safe from the chaos outside. But caves were not always available, and sometimes they were dangerous, already inhabited by bears, lions, or other predators. In such moments, the ingenuity of humanity shone through most brightly. One of the most striking creations of Ice Age survival was the mammoth bone hut. Archaeologists in places like Ukraine and Russia have unearthed the remains of circular structures made from mammoth bones, some dating back over 20,000 years. Imagine the effort required, hauling massive tusks, jawbones, and ribs, arranging them into frames, then covering the skeleton with hides, grasses, and soil to block the cold. These shelters stood like monuments to both desperation and determination, physical proof that humans could take the bones of the largest beasts of the Ice Age and transform them into walls against the winter. Inside these huts, pits were dug into the soil, lined with fur and surrounded by fire pits, creating layers of protection against a relentless cold. The hides of animals were equally important in constructing shelters. Whether stretched across wooden frames to form tents or draped over bone structures, hides created flexibility and mobility. Hunters moving with migrating herds could carry their homes with them, setting up camps in valleys or near rivers where game was plentiful. The hides trapped warmth and blocked wind, while sleeping pits dug beneath the shelter's floor added another layer of insulation. Fire within such shelters had to be carefully controlled. Smoke holes or open seams in the hide allowed ventilation, preventing suffocation while still maintaining warmth. It was a delicate balance. Enough air to breathe, enough walls to survive. Stone, bone, and hide were not just materials but symbols of the human relationship with the natural world. Caves were gifts of the earth itself, immense and immovable. Mammoth bones were trophies of both death and life, reminders that humans could not only hunt but also reshape the remains of giants into structures of endurance. Hides were the flexible skin of survival, stretched between necessity and invention. Each form of shelter was more than protection. It was a declaration of humanity's refusal to surrender. Inside these shelters, the interplay of pit and fire created the rhythm of survival. A cave might echo with the crackling of flames, shadows dancing across stone, while family members huddled in a pit pressed against the earth. A mammoth bone hut might creak in the wind, its tusks forming an arch that stood like a cathedral of survival, while the pit within glowed with embers reflecting in watchful eyes. A hide tent might flutter in the storm, yet within its thin walls a pit filled with fur held the fragile warmth of children sleeping beside their mothers. Each image reveals not only a method of survival, but also the determination to create stability, even comfort, in a world that allowed none easily. The construction of shelters also shaped community. Building a mammoth bone hut was not the work of one pair of hands, but of many. It required the cooperation of hunters, the carrying of immense bones, the stretching of hides, and the careful placing of stones to anchor the structure. In this way, shelters bound families and tribes together, uniting them in acts of shared survival. Around the fires inside, children learned the skills of their people, how to scrape hides, carve tools, or dig pits lined with moss. Elders told stories that gave meaning to their struggle, perhaps of the spirits of the mammoths whose bones now kept the cold at bay, or the earth itself offering stone caves as gifts. Shelter was not only material but also cultural, a center around which identity and resilience were built. Yet these shelters were never absolute. A storm too fierce could drive snow through cracks and hides. A predator too determined could invade a cave. Even the strongest mammoth bone structure could collapse under the weight of drifting snow. The caveman's life was never free from danger, and his shelters were never fortresses in the modern sense. They were fragile bubbles of life carved out of a hostile world, temporary sanctuaries where pits, fires, and walls worked together to hold death at a distance. But fragility did not mean failure. It meant resilience. To rebuild after collapse, to relight a fire after it died, to stretch hides again after the wind tore them. This was survival. Imagine one such night. Snow falls endlessly outside, blanketing the mammoth steppe in silence. A circle of bones rises from the white ground, hides stretched tight against their frame. Inside, a pit lined with furs holds the warmth of a family, their breaths rising in the dim light. A fire crackles nearby, smoke curling through a seam in the hide roof. Outside, wolves pad silently across the snow, their yellow eyes glinting in the dark. But they do not enter. The firelight flickers through the seams, and the scent of smoke hangs in the air. Within those walls of bone and skin, humanity endures another night. The pit conserves the fragile heat of bodies. The fire feeds it, the hides shield it, and the bones hold it all together. For one more night, life continues. These shelters, stone caves, bone huts, hide tents, were the stage on which the drama of Ice Age survival was played out. Within them, pits and fire worked in harmony. Families huddled together, and the storm outside became something to endure rather than something to perish in. They were never permanent, never perfect, but they were enough. And in the bitter mathematics of survival, enough was all that mattered. In the heart of the Ice Age, survival was measured not in days, but in meals. The body burned fuel like a relentless fire when exposed to sub-zero winds and endless snow, demanding a constant supply of energy. For prehistoric people, every bite of food was not just nourishment, but a spark of life, a fragile barrier holding death at bay. In winter, when green plants vanished under ice and rivers froze into silence, food was the most valuable treasure. To eat was to endure. To fail was to vanish into the cold forever. Hunting became the center of existence. Mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, reindeer horses, and bison were not only prey but lifelines. The chase required courage, strategy, and collective effort. Hunters armed with spears tipped by flint or bone crept across snowy plains, reading tracks pressed into the ice, predicting the movement of herds. They hunted not alone but in groups, because no single person could bring down such massive creatures. A mammoth, if felled, could feed an entire tribe for weeks, its fat and meat sustaining bodies, and its bones and hides transformed into tools and shelter. Yet to fail in the hunt was devastating. Wasted energy, empty stomachs, and deeper hunger gnawing at the tribe. The hunt itself was an act of both danger and ingenuity. Spears had to be launched with deadly precision, often using spear throwers to extend range and power. Some tribes drove herds into ravines or toward cliffs, trapping them in the geography of the land. Others waited for the beasts to become weak in the snow, striking when exhaustion dulled their defenses. The risks were immense. One misstep, and hunters could be trampled beneath hooves or tusks, crushed by the very animals they sought for survival. But hunger was a greater predator than mammoths or lions, and so the risks were taken again and again. Beyond the giants, smaller prey filled the gaps of survival. Reindeer were essential, migrating in great numbers and providing not only meat but also hides for warmth. Wild horses and steppe bison roamed the plains, their flesh dense with calories needed to fuel the fire of human bodies. Rabbits, birds, and fish became valuable when larger hunts failed. Even scavenging played its role. Sometimes the frozen carcass of an animal, preserved in snow, was found and stripped of flesh by desperate hands. Nothing was wasted, not marrow from bones, not tendon for cord, not fat for fuel. To waste was to die. Plant life in winter was scarce, but not absent. Hardy roots, seeds, and frozen berries could sometimes be dug from beneath snow. Women and children often specialized in this gathering, searching in hidden pockets where plants clung to life. Pine needles could be steeped for their vital vitamin C, preventing disease when meat alone dominated the diet. Mosses and lichens, though meager, sometimes filled empty stomachs. The balance between hunter and gatherer roles meant that survival was not a single act, but a constant weaving of many small contributions. Preservation of food was as critical as finding it. The cold was both enemy and ally. Meat could be frozen in the snow, stored in pits, and retrieved weeks later without spoiling. Fat was prized for its high energy, rendered and stored to fuel lamps or fires, and to mix with dried meat into nutrient-dense rations. Dried strips of meat, smoked over flames, became a portable food supply for journeys across frozen plains. Bones cracked open yielded marrow, dense with calories, a hidden resource that sustained bodies when surface flesh was gone. The ingenuity of cavemen turned scarcity into strategy, transforming each part of a kill into fuel for survival. The act of eating was itself a ritual of gratitude and endurance. Around the fire, families huddled in shelters, tearing at roasted meat, the smoke curling toward the cave ceiling. The taste of fat melting on the tongue was more than pleasure. It was reassurance that the tribe had bought itself another day of life. Children gnawed on bones, elders divided portions, and the community bound itself together through the sharing of food. To eat together was to survive together, and each meal carried the weight of triumph over the winter outside. Contrast shaped every meal. Abundance came after a successful hunt, a rare feast where bellies were filled and fires blazed bright. But scarcity was always near. Weeks could pass with only scraps or dried remnants. Hunger hollowed eyes, weakened limbs, and cast a shadow of despair across the tribe. The line between feast and famine was thin, as fragile as firelight flickering in a storm. For every story of victory over the mammoth, there were silent tales of starvation buried under snow. Psychologically, the search for food weighed heavily on these people. Each hunter stepping into the snow carried not only weapons, but the responsibility of their community's survival. Each gatherer scraping at frozen soil knew that even the smallest root could mean a difference between life and death. This pressure shaped their minds, giving rise to rituals before hunts, offerings to spirits, and perhaps even prayers carved into stone walls with the images of animals. Food was not only physical, it was spiritual, the thread binding human beings to the world around them. The Ice Age diet was brutal in its simplicity, yet it forged resilience. Fat, meat, marrow, and bones sustained bodies hardened by cold. Roots, berries, and herbs offered rare variation and vital nutrients. The preservation of food taught foresight, patience, and planning. Each bite carried a memory of struggle, the danger of the hunt, and the victory of survival. And in the silence of winter, when snow buried the land and predators howled across the plains, the simple act of eating became humanity's defiance against extinction. Picture one such scene. A mammoth hunt has succeeded. In the center of a shelter, meat roasts over an open fire, fat sizzling and dripping onto the flames. Children laugh with greasy faces. Elders chew slowly, savoring each bite. Outside, the cold wind rattles against the hides, but inside, warmth and nourishment fill the air. The pit beneath them holds a body heat. The fire holds the light, and the food holds their future. In this fragile sanctuary of bone, stone, and skin, humanity continues to endure one mouthful at a time. To survive the endless winters of the Ice Age, cavemen needed more than meat, pits, and hides. They needed a force greater than themselves, something that could transform frozen nights into tolerable evenings, that could turn raw flesh into nourishment, and that could push back the shadows where predators prowled. That force was fire. For prehistoric people, Fire was not just a tool but a companion, an eternal ally against the cold, a fragile yet powerful boundary between life and death. It was warmth, light, and protection, but also a source of fear, because without it survival would unravel. Archaeological evidence shows that early humans mastered fire more than 400,000 years ago, and by the Ice Age, it had become a central part of their existence. Yet fire was never taken for granted. It was both gift and burden. To keep it alive required vigilance. A fire left untended could die in the night, leaving families shivering in darkness, exposed to frost and predators. A fire that grew uncontrolled could consume shelters of hide or grass, scattering tribes into the freezing wilderness. Fire demanded respect, and so entire rituals developed around tending it, guarding it, and sharing it. The process of making fire was itself an act of skill and patience. Sparks were struck from flint against pyrite or iron-rich stones, showering tiny embers that had to be carefully caught in dry tinder. This tinder might be moss, dry grass, or fibers scraped from plants. Once the ember caught, it was coaxed with gentle breath until flame blossomed, fragile at first, then roaring with fuel. In other places, friction was used. Sticks spun rapidly in grooves until heat built and smoke appeared. To create fire in the cold, often with numb fingers and wind biting at the skin, was not just a technical act, but an achievement of willpower. Every successful spark was a small victory against extinction. Once burning, fire transformed existence. It allowed meat to be cooked, breaking down fibers and killing parasites, making meals more digestible and safer. Bones could be softened for marrow extraction. Plants that were bitter or tough became edible when roasted. Warm water could be boiled from snow, preventing dehydration. Beyond food, fire hardened spear points, preserved hides, and created light by which tasks could continue after sunset. The day no longer ended with darkness. Around the fire, life expanded. But perhaps the greatest gift of fire was warmth. In shelters of bone, stone, or hide, flames glowed at the center, filling spaces with heat that seeped into sleeping pits lined with fur. Without fire, the cold seeped in mercilessly, freezing breath in the air and stiffening limbs. With fire, the biting wind outside became less threatening. Its howls reduced the background noise. Families could gather, huddling close, their bodies absorbing not only the physical heat, but the reassurance of safety. Firelight flickered across walls, casting moving shadows that turned stone shelters into places of drama, myth, and imagination. The psychological comfort of fire cannot be overstated. In a world dominated by ice, darkness, and predators, the glow of flames brought hope. Children fell asleep to the crackle of burning wood, their minds soothed by warmth. Adults found space for conversation, storytelling, and planning. Elders passed down knowledge in the fire's glow, their words framed by the dance of light. Fire was a stage where human culture itself was nurtured. The first stories, the first myths, the first moments of shared imagination, all may have been born in circles around Ice Age fires. Contrast defined fire as well. It was both protector and destroyer. It kept wolves at bay, their yellow eyes watching from beyond the ring of light, but also demanded endless fuel, forcing people to gather wood or dry dung in the freezing cold. It gave comfort, but it also revealed vulnerability. If fire went out during a snowstorm, relighting it could be nearly impossible. The glow that kept families safe also made them visible to predators or rival groups. Fire was never neutral. It was survival's double-edged weapon, both blessing and risk. The spiritual dimension of fire also grew in these icy landscapes. To see flames leap from lifeless stone was almost magical. Tribes may have believed fire was a gift from gods or spirits, something sacred to be protected. Charcoal marks on cave walls and evidence of fire pits in ritual spaces suggest that flames played roles in ceremonies, hunts, and burial practices. Fire symbolized transformation, the turning of death meat bones plants into life, warmth, sustenance, energy. It was not just survival, but meaning, binding humans to forces beyond themselves. Imagine one such night. A storm rages outside, snow piling against the entrance of a cave. Within, a fire burns brightly, fed carefully with gathered wood. Sparks rise into the air, clinging to smoke that curls against the stone ceiling. Children nestle in pits close to the flame, mothers feeding them pieces of roasted meat. Elders sit slightly apart, their eyes reflecting the firelight as they tell tales of hunts, spirits, and ancestors. Outside, the wind howls like a beast denied its prey, but inside, the glow of fire turns fear into calm. The flames are fragile, yes, but they are also eternal, so long as hands remain to tend them. The mastery of fire gave humans dominance in ways no muscle or claw could achieve. Predators feared it, prey was cooked by it, and communities thrived around it. In many ways, fire was humanity's first domesticated companion, long before dogs or cattle. It was wild, yet humans tamed it. It was fragile, yet they sustained it. Without fire, there could be no winter survival, no caves turned into homes, no roasted feasts after the hunt. Fire was not simply part of the Ice Age story. It was its beating heart. The Ice Age demanded more from humanity than strength or instinct. Claws, fur, and fangs belonged to their animal rivals, but the cavemen carried something far more subtle: the power to shape tools. With stone, bone, wood, and sinew, they transformed raw materials into weapons and instruments of survival. In winter, when every mistake was punished by frost and hunger, these tools became lifelines. A sharpened flint edge was more than rock. It was a difference between slicing meat or starving, between defending a child or losing them to the jaws of a predator. The story of survival in the cold cannot be told without the story of the tools forged by human hands. Flint was a cornerstone of Ice Age technology. When struck, it fractured in sharp, razor-like edges, producing blades capable of cutting through thick hides or splitting flesh from bone. These blades were crafted into scrapers for cleaning hides, knives for butchering, and spearheads for hunting. Each shard of flint carried within it the energy of survival. Skilled toolmakers chipped away at stone with careful strikes, shaping points and edges, passing knowledge from generation to generation. On bitter nights, while wind roared beyond the shelter, sparks from flint striking against pyrite might ignite a fire, while the same stone shaped into a point could bring down the next day's meal. Spears were perhaps the most vital weapon of the hunt. Long wooden shafts tipped with flint or bone heads extended human reach, allowing hunters to wound prey from a distance. Over time, innovation gave rise to the spear thrower, a carved lever that added force and range, sending projectiles with lethal power into mammoths or reindeer. In winter hunts, when snow made close pursuit dangerous, this technology allowed hunters to strike without stepping into trampling hooves. The spear was not just a weapon. It was strategy carved in wood and stone, proof that human ingenuity could level the field against giants. Bone and antler offered a different kind of versatility. They were carved into harpoons for fishing beneath ice, hooks for catching river creatures in thawed patches, and barbed points for piercing tough hides. Needles made from bone were small yet revolutionary, piercing holes through animal skins so sinew could stitch them into clothing. In the heart of winter, when icy winds threatened to freeze exposed flesh, the bone needle became as important as the spear. Clothing sewn tightly together, fur stitched into boots, and hides transformed into cloaks meant survival during hunts and migration. The needle, delicate as it was, stitched life itself into every garment. Traps and snares extended human reach beyond direct combat. Simple nooses woven from sinew could catch rabbits, while pits covered with branches might ensnare larger animals. These traps allowed tribes to conserve energy, an essential tactic during the draining winter months when calories were precious. Imagine a hunter waking to find a snow hare struggling in a trap, its body destined to add vital protein to the evening meal. The trap was silent, patient, and effective, an invisible ally working while people slept. Tools were not limited to hunting or clothing. Scrapers turned hides into usable leather. Grinding stones processed roots or dried seeds, and awls pierced holes in shelters. Even torches, crafted from branches wrapped in resin-rich material, extended vision into caves or nighttime hunts. Every tool was designed with winter in mind, to gather fuel more quickly, to cut through frozen carcasses, to build and repair shelters against storms. The toolkit of the caveman was not random. It was a careful refinement of generations learning to adapt to the harshest season. The making of these tools carried cultural weight. Within shelters, families gathered as skilled hands flaked stone, sparks flying in the firelight. Children watched and learned, absorbing not only technique, but also the patience and precision required. The sound of stone striking stone echoed like a ritual rhythm, connecting the present ancestors who had chipped tools centuries before. Tools carried memory. A flint knife passed down through hands was more than a blade. It was a link to those who had survived winters long gone. Yet the tools were also symbols of contrast. To hold a spear was to hold both hope and danger. It might pierce a mammoth, filling stomachs for weeks, or shatter against tusks, leaving hunters empty-handed and exhausted. A bone needle could save lives by creating warm clothes, but a lost needle could doom a family to cold exposure. Tools were extensions of human will, but they were fragile, and each break or loss carried heavy consequences. Unlike claws or teeth, they were not grown by the body but had to be crafted again and again, a cycle of resilience against destruction. In winter, every detail mattered. A poorly tied sinew could cause a spearhead to snap free mid-hunt. A dull scraper could leave hide stiff and useless. A weak snare could let prey escape, costing days of effort. Cavemen lived in a constant state of vigilance, knowing that their tools were both their greatest advantage and their most vulnerable weakness. Maintenance was as important as invention, sharpening edges, tightening bindings, replacing handles. To neglect a tool was to invite hunger and death. Imagine one such moment. A small tribe crouches in the glow of firelight within a cave. Outside, snow falls in thick silence, erasing all paths. Inside, a hunter carves a new spear point from flint, striking carefully until shards scatter across the ground. Another pierces holes with a bone awl, pulling sinew through the finished stitching of fur cloak. Children sit close, eyes wide, watching as human survival is shaped before them, stroke by stroke. When the work is done, tools are tested, held to the firelight, admired not as objects but as lifelines. In this simple scene, the essence of humanity shines. Hands turning the raw earth into weapons, clothes, and hope. The Ice Age did not forgive weakness, and so tools became the armor of humanity. They gave shape to survival, transforming stone, bone, and wood into extensions of thought and will. Spears struck from a distance. Traps worked in silence. Needles stitched warmth into existence. Together, they formed an invisible shield against starvation, cold, and fear. Without them, winter would have swallowed humanity. With them, even in the darkest storms, people carved out survival, one strike of flint at a time. When winter wrapped the prehistoric world in silence and snow, survival became more than a battle against hunger or cold. It became a test of human cooperation. Alone, a single caveman stood little chance against blizzards, predators, or starvation. But together, within family groups and bands, they forged a shield against the season's cruelty. Social bonds were not a luxury of warmth. They were the backbone of survival itself. Every fire lit in a cave, every hunt shared, every story told around the flames carried a deeper meaning. The tribe was stronger than the sum of its parts. The basic unit of survival was the family. Within caves or shelters, small groups of kin huddled together, sharing warmth and responsibilities. Mothers nurtured children, fathers hunted, and elders passed down the wisdom of survival. But these roles were never fixed in stone. In times of scarcity, adaptability was as important as tradition. Women joined hunts, men stitched hides, and even children contributed by gathering wood or setting snares. The harshness of winter blurred boundaries, teaching every member of the group that survival required flexibility. At the heart of these families was a fire. Flames burned not only for heat, but also for connection. Around it, bonds were reinforced through shared meals and stories. Children listened wide-eyed as elders recounted tales of hunts long past, shaping memory and identity. Firelight illuminated faces, casting shadows on cave walls, as if ancestors themselves leaned in to listen. The social fabric was woven in these moments, through warmth, narrative, and togetherness. Winter did not just test their bodies, it tested their unity. Trust was a currency of survival. When hunters left for days in the frozen wilderness, those left behind relied on their return, not just with food, but with hope. A broken promise could mean starvation. Betrayal could doom the group, but cooperation brought abundance. When mammoths or reindeer fell, their meat was too great for one family alone. Sharing ensured that no one was left behind, and in return, others would share in their time of need. Reciprocity was not charity. It was survival insurance, a web of trust spun through necessity. Leadership within these groups often rested with the experienced, not the strongest. Elders with knowledge of animal migrations, weather patterns, and shelter building guided decisions. They knew which valleys held less wind, where firewood could be found even under snow, or how to mend strained relations within the tribe. Age carried authority because memory meant survival. Still, leadership was fragile. If a leader's advice failed too often, confidence eroded, and the group might shift its loyalty. Winter forced pragmatism. Respect was earned through results. The social bonds extended beyond the immediate family into larger bands, sometimes merging with neighboring groups for hunts or protection. These gatherings were fragile alliances, but they carried strength in numbers. More hunters meant larger prey could be targeted. More families meant more eyes to keep watch against predators or rival groups. Yet, cooperation carried risks. Scarce resources had to be divided, and tensions could flare. Winter sharpened both unity and rivalry, reminding everyone that survival walked a narrow path between cooperation and competition. Children played a vital role in these bonds. Their survival was the tribe's future, and so they were protected fiercely. But they were also taught from the earliest age to contribute. Little hands carried sticks for firewood, practiced throwing miniature spears, or learned to stitch scraps of hide. Games became training, laughter blending with lessons in survival. In this way, childhood was not a carefree season. It was preparation for the harsh responsibilities of adulthood, especially when winter demanded every member's effort. Elders, though physically weaker, were indispensable. In the unforgiving cold, knowledge was more powerful than muscle. Elders recalled which plants could still be dug beneath the snow, which river bends stayed unfrozen longest, and how to interpret the tracks of animals across ice. They were living libraries, storing centuries of adaptation in their memories. Around the fire, their voices carried weight, binding the tribe to its past while guiding it into the future. When storms howled outside, their stories provided not only wisdom but also comfort, reminding the group that others had endured winters before and survived. Yet not all bonds were equal. Conflict simmered in close quarters, where hunger frayed patience and fear sharpened tempers. Disputes over food, jealousy, or failed hunts could split families apart. Some groups fractured in the dead of winter, unable to maintain unity. Isolation often meant death. The tribes that endured were those that found ways to resolve conflict, often through ritual, negotiation, or shared storytelling. Conflict was not eliminated, but it was managed because the cost of division was too high. Winter also magnified gender dynamics. Women, often the keepers of the hearth, controlled vital skills of sewing, cooking, and gathering, while men risked their lives in hunts. But the cold did not allow strict divisions. Many women hunted smaller prey, while men contributed to crafting clothing or repairing shelters. Survival blurred these lines, creating a system of interdependence rather than rigid hierarchy. In this sense, winter was a great equalizer, reminding the tribe that no role was superior. All were necessary. Perhaps the most powerful expression of unity came through rituals and shared traditions. Carvings on bones, handprints on cave walls, and chants around fire were not idle acts. They were anchors of identity in a world of uncertainty. Rituals reinforced belonging, reminding each member that they were part of something larger. In the darkest months, these traditions became acts of resistance against despair. They whispered, "We are still here. We will endure." Imagine a winter night deep inside a cave. Outside, snow falls endlessly, sealing the world in silence. Inside, families gather close, wrapped in furs. The fire crackles, shadows dance. An elder tells a tale of the great mammoth hunt from decades past. Children lean forward, hunters sharpen tools, mothers stitch hides, and for a moment, the fear of cold and hunger fades. What remains is the bond, the unspoken truth that survival is not an individual victory, but a shared one. In the Ice Age, winter shaped not just bodies and tools, but hearts and relationships. It demanded cooperation, enforced trust, and elevated memory. Families became lifeboats, tribes became fortresses, and traditions became lighthouses in the blizzard. Social bonds were not fragile threads. They were ropes woven strong enough to pull humanity through the cold. Without them, the fire would die. With them, it burned against the storm, carrying warmth, hope, and life itself. Amid the brutality of Ice Age winters, when survival hinged on fire, food, and shelter, early humans carried within them another hunger, an inner need to make sense of their world. Even as blizzards raged and starvation loomed, they carved, painted, and sang. At first glance, this might seem like a luxury, something unnecessary when weighed against the cold practicalities of survival. Yet, art and symbolism played a role as vital as firewood or fur, shaping not only the tribe's identity, but also its resilience. Through cave paintings, carvings, body adornment, and ritual symbols, prehistoric humans created a shared language of meaning that gave them strength against despair. Deep inside caves, where flickering torchlight-illuminated stone walls, artists left their visions for future generations. Bison, mammoths, horses, and reindeer danced across rock faces in ochre reds, charcoal blacks, and clay browns. These images were not idle decorations. Many anthropologists believe they serve as prayers in pigment, attempts to capture the spirit of animals and ensure successful hunts. In winter, when herds were scarce and hunger loomed large, the act of painting became an act of hope, a ritual to call abundance into the tribe's life. The cold outside was indifferent, but the walls glowed with human intention. Symbols extended beyond the cave walls into everyday life. Bones carved with repeating lines, stones etched with spirals, and pendants fashioned from ivory or antler carried meaning for those who wore them. Some were charms of protection against the unseen dangers of winter nights. Others may have represented family ties, victories in the hunt, or even rites of passage. A necklace carved from wolf teeth might declare courage, while painted stripes across the face could serve as both decoration and spiritual armor. The language of art transcended words, binding people together in a shared understanding of what mattered most. Winter nights amplified the need for storytelling and symbolism. Around the fire, stories were not simply entertainment. They were lessons coded in myth. A tale about a hunter who disrespected the spirit of the mammoth and starved the next winter was both cautionary and symbolic, reinforcing the bond between humans and the animals they depended upon. These stories gave meaning to suffering, transforming random chance into moral order. In this way, art and myth did more than soothe fears. They provided structure in a chaotic, frozen world. The act of creating art was also a form of psychological survival. Imagine a hunter who had failed for days, returning empty-handed to a hungry tribe. By painting the outline of a bison on stone, he might reclaim a sense of power over the uncontrollable forces around him. Creativity became a coping mechanism, turning despair into expression. The very act of painting, carving, or singing transformed fear into ritual, giving people a sense that they were not powerless in the face of winter's merciless grip. Rituals tied to art often marked the cycles of the season. Some groups may have gathered during solstices to light fires, chant, or carve symbols, marking the longest night as a turning point of hope. Handprints on cave walls, red or black impressions pressed by children and adults alike, served as declarations of existence. We were here. We endured. In the heart of the Ice Age, where life was fragile and death constant, such marks were acts of defiance. They were humanity's fingerprints against oblivion, proof that survival was not only physical but also spiritual. Winter also shaped the themes of prehistoric art. The animals most often depicted were those essential for survival: reindeer for hides, mammoths for meat, bison for both. In painting them, early humans did not only reflect their environment, they declared reverence for it. The frozen tundra outside the cave might seem barren, but inside the cave, its richness lived again in vivid color. These depictions reminded the tribe of abundance, teaching younger generations which animals were crucial, how they moved, and where to find them. The paintings were both art and instruction manual. Art also strengthened group identity. In long, dark winters, when people huddled together for months, conflict could easily arise. Rituals, songs, and shared symbols reminded the group of their common purpose. A painted animal was not just an image. It was a reminder of collective hunts, shared meals, and victories over hunger. The cave walls became a tribe's history book, telling the story of who they were and why they endured. In this way, art was glue, keeping groups united during the most dangerous seasons. The symbolic power of art extended into burial practices as well. Archaeologists have found Ice Age graves where bodies were decorated with red ochre, adorned with beads, and placed carefully with tools or animal remains. Even in death, people sought meaning, believing perhaps that winter was not the end but a passage to another existence. By decorating graves, they honored not only the individual but also their shared belief in continuity. These rituals soothed the living, giving them strength to face the next blizzard knowing their loved one's spirit had been cared for. Art, in many ways, was survival of the spirit. While fire warmed the body, symbols warmed the heart. They gave people a reason to keep fighting against the cold, a reminder that their lives held value beyond the daily struggle for food. A handprint, a carved bone, a painted bison. These were not luxuries of idle time, but lifelines of hope. They said, "We are more than animals. We are beings of meaning." In the harshest winters, when hunger gnawed and frostbite claimed fingers and toes, art allowed people to step beyond survival into belonging. It was a mirror of their fears, a canvas of their dreams, and a declaration that they would not be erased by the cold. Through paint, song, and symbol, cavemen transformed the frozen silence into a chorus of human resilience. And though the ice has long melted, the marks they left remain, whispering across time. We endured, we created, we lived. Winter was never simply a battle with the cold. It was also a season of heightened danger from predators, creatures as desperate as humans to secure scarce food. When snow blanketed the land, prey animals grew harder to track and weaker in number. For wolves, cave bears, and even the great saber-toothed cats, Hunger drove them closer to human camps, caves, and hunting grounds. For prehistoric humans, survival in winter meant not only braving frost and famine, but also sharing the frozen world with powerful rivals whose instincts were as sharp as their fangs. The Ice Age was not only an environment, it was an arena where survival was contested daily between man and beast. Wolves were among the most constant threats. Agile, intelligent, and relentless, they hunted in packs, their unity echoing the social bonds of early humans. A single wolf was dangerous. A dozen, circling the edges of a camp, were terrifying. In deep winter, when game was scarce, wolves often shadowed hunting parties, waiting for weakness, injury, or an unguarded kill. Sometimes, these encounters ended in violence, wolves charging hunters to seize meat, hunters driving them back with firebrands and spears. Yet wolves were not always enemies. Over time, humans learned to recognize their patterns, and some wolves, drawn to scraps and firelight, lingered near human groups, beginning the first fragile steps toward domestication. But in the Ice Age winters, before loyalty was forged, wolves were first remembered as the cold's fanged allies. Even more terrifying were cave bears. These massive creatures, towering over humans and weighing as much as 1,000 pounds, claimed caves as their dens during winter hibernation. For cavemen seeking shelter, stumbling into a bear's territory could mean instant death. Imagine a family, desperate for warmth, creeping into what seemed an empty cavern, only to hear the growl of a disturbed bear, rising in fury from the shadows. For this reason, many groups painted or carved bears on cave walls, treating them as spiritual beings, part predator and part god. Some anthropologists believe these depictions were not merely warnings but acts of reverence, acknowledging that such creatures were both feared and respected. To kill a cave bear was not only a triumph of survival, but also a ritual moment worthy of memory and myth. The saber-toothed cats, with their enormous curved fangs, haunted the imagination as well as the tundra. Though less common than wolves or bears, their presence was unforgettable. Silent hunters, they could stalk a group in snow or leap upon prey with devastating power. For humans traveling long distances across icy plains, the threat of ambush was ever present. Spears and teamwork gave humans a fighting chance, but the sight of massive paw prints in fresh snow was enough to chill even the bravest hunter's resolve. In such moments, survival meant vigilance. Eyes scanning tree lines, ears straining for sounds masked by the wind. The cold was merciless, but predators added a sharper edge of fear. Winter forced predators and humans into direct competition for the same prey. Reindeer, bison, and mammoths were life sources for both. A group of hunters might track a herd for days, only to find wolves had beaten them to the chase. At times, the aftermath of a predator's kill became opportunity. Humans scavenging frozen carcasses left behind. But this carried risk. Approaching too soon meant confronting a pack unwilling to surrender its meal. Waiting too long meant bones picked clean. The line between danger and sustenance was thin, and winter made the stakes deadly high. Predators also threatened camps directly. The scent of roasting meat could carry on icy winds for miles, drawing hungry animals closer. Families huddled inside shelters, clutching their children, listening to the growls and howls outside the firelight. Fire became the ultimate shield, its crackle and glow a barrier predators respected. Spears were sharpened not only for hunts but for defense, kept within arm's reach at all times. A moment of carelessness, leaving food unguarded, embers dying low, could invite disaster. For humans, winter nights were filled with more than cold. They were haunted by glowing eyes just beyond the shadows. But encounters with predators shaped more than fear. They shaped identity and culture. To face a wolf pack or bring down a bear was not merely survival, but glory. Stories of such confrontations were retold around the fire, building legends that bound the group together. Hunters scarred from claws or teeth were admired as living symbols of resilience. Children grew up on these tales, learning both caution and courage from their elders' memories. Winter's predators were woven into the spiritual fabric of life, becoming symbols of power, guardians, and adversaries in equal measure. Interestingly, these struggles also seeded the earliest partnerships between humans and animals. Wolves, once feared, slowly became allies through shared necessity. Perhaps it began with an orphan pup taken into a camp, or with scavenger wolves tolerating the presence of humans for scraps of meat. The cold fostered unlikely bonds, and from rivalry emerged cooperation. In this way, the predators of winter were not only foes but also catalysts of change, pushing humans to expand their strategies, sharpen their tools, and broaden their imaginations. Every encounter, whether with wolves, cave bears, or saber-toothed cats, carried high stakes. For some tribes, a failed defense meant extinction. For others, successful hunts of dangerous animals provided food, clothing, and bones for tools. Even the risks themselves taught resilience. The Ice Age demanded that humans balance fear with bravery, respect with aggression. They could not eliminate predators, but they could learn from them. Wolves taught cooperation, bears taught respect for territory, and cats taught vigilance. These lessons, carved into memory as deeply as paintings on cave walls, guided survival long after the snow melted. In the frozen silence of winter, predators were constant reminders of life's fragility. They embodied the raw, untamed forces of nature, forces that could not be negotiated with, only confronted. And yet, it was through these encounters that humans grew stronger. Fire, weapons, strategy, and even the first sparks of domestication all arose in part from this struggle. The predators of winter were not only threats, they were teachers. They shaped humanity's courage, unity, and ingenuity, ensuring that when the cold returned year after year, the people were not only ready but wiser. Thus, the story of Ice Age survival is also the story of encounters with fangs and claws. Winter tested not only the strength of the human body, but the strength of human spirit. To endure meant facing wolves in the night, avoiding the dens of bears, and keeping watch for silent cats in snow. It was a world where survival was never guaranteed, where every shadow could hold danger. Yet it was also a world where humanity learned to endure not in spite of predators, but because of them. Winter was not always endured in stillness. For many prehistoric groups, survival meant movement, tracking the rhythms of the animals upon which they depended. When reindeer herds shifted southward, when mammoths sought grazing grounds, or when rivers froze and blocked fishing routes, cavemen faced a stark choice: stay and starve or move and follow the lifeblood of the hunt. These migrations were not casual wanderings, but grueling odysseys across frozen plains, jagged mountains, and endless snow. Each step forward was both an act of necessity and of courage, for winter's road was as deadly as it was essential. The decision to migrate was rarely made lightly. Elders weighed the risks, recalling past winters when herds had shifted or storms had devastated camps. Scouts ventured ahead, reading the land like a book. Hoof print half buried in snow, broken branches where animals had passed, distant calls carried on icy winds. Once the signs were certain, the group prepared to move. Belongings were bundled into hides, tools carried carefully, and children wrapped in furs. Fire, the heart of survival, was preserved by carrying embers in hollow bones or clay pots, ensuring warmth could be reignited wherever the journey ended. The terrain itself was merciless. Vast tundras stretched without shelter, where wind scoured the land and turned faces raw. Crossing rivers posed mortal danger, as ice might crack beneath weight, plunging families into freezing waters. Mountains, cloaked in snow, demanded both endurance and ingenuity. Paths carved with stone tools, crude sleds dragged by manpower, and ropes fashioned from sinew. Each obstacle drained strength, yet retreat was not an option. To stand still was to accept hunger. To move was to gamble with survival. Migration was a wager against death. Hunger accompanied every step. Rations were meager, often dried meat or marrow-rich bones cracked open along the way. Women gathered roots, berries, or frozen tubers where possible, though the land gave little in the dead of winter. Hunters scanned the horizon for signs of game, shadows on the snow, trails of dung, or flocks of birds circling above herds. A successful kill during migration was not only nourishment but salvation, lifting spirits and giving the group strength to continue. Failure meant children weakened, elders faltered, and hope thinned like smoke in the wind. Yet migration was not only hardship, it was also a time of unity. Families moved as one body, watching over each other, sharing burdens. A hunter might carry a child when a mother grew weary, or women might take shifts tending the embers. Songs and chants often accompanied the march, keeping rhythm and morale. These sounds pierced the silence of the tundra, a declaration of life against a vast emptiness. In this way, migration became both ordeal and ritual, an annual trial binding the group together. Encounters with predators were inevitable. Wolves often shadowed migrating groups, drawn by the scent of meat or the weakness of stragglers. Fires were lit at night in circles, forming protective barriers. Spears bristled in every hand, ready for sudden attack. Sometimes, herds themselves became dangerous. Mammoths, while essential for survival, could trample hunters if provoked. A single misstep during a migration hunt could cost lives. Humans learned to move with respect, treating both prey and predator as forces to be endured, not merely conquered. Migration also fostered contact with other human groups. Sometimes, paths converge at river valleys or plains rich with game. These meetings were tense, for resources were scarce, and rivalry could erupt into violence. Yet just as often, alliances were forged. Groups shared food, exchanged tools, or even intermarried, weaving wider networks of kinship. Winter migration thus shaped not only survival but also social evolution, teaching early humans the dual importance of defense and diplomacy. The psychological weight of migration was immense. To leave behind a known shelter and strike into the unknown demanded faith. Elders spoke stories of ancestors who had crossed the same paths, reinforcing courage through memory. Rituals were performed before journeys. Chants to call upon spirits, offerings left at sacred stones, or handprints pressed on cave walls as blessings for the road. These acts turned fear into hope, giving people strength to face the uncertainty of the horizon. Children experienced migration as a harsh school. They learned endurance by walking long distances, patience by enduring hunger, and responsibility by helping carry supplies. For them, migration was also wonder. Watching herds stretch across the plains, hearing wolves howling under the moon, or seeing mountains rise from snowy mist. The hardships of winter journeys became the foundation of their education, preparing them for adulthood where survival meant constant adaptation. For elders, migration was bittersweet. Their bodies slowed by age, they often relied on younger members for support. Yet their role was indispensable, guiding the route, recalling safe passages, and warning against known dangers. Their voices kept the group grounded, anchoring each step in the wisdom of generations. To migrate without elders was to risk repeating past mistakes. In this way, knowledge traveled alongside bodies, ensuring continuity across winters. The end of migration, when new grazing lands were reached or a valley rich in game was found, was a moment of profound relief. Fires blazed higher, children laughed louder, and bellies filled once again. But even in rest, the memory of the journey lingered. Scars on feet, tools worn thin, and stories of dangers faced. These journeys were not forgotten. They were recounted for years, shaping identity and reminding each generation that survival was not given, but earned step by step across the frozen world. In truth, migration defined prehistoric humanity as much as fire or tools. It demanded mobility, cooperation, and foresight. It carved paths that later generations would follow, laying the groundwork for exploration, trade, and settlement. Each winter journey was both a physical struggle and a symbolic act, proof that humans were not prisoners of the cold but travelers of it, capable of bending even the harshest season to their will. Thus, following the herds through winter was more than survival strategy. It was humanity in motion, across icy plains and shadowed forests. People carried their fires, their stories, and their hopes. The snow may have erased their footprints, but their migrations left deeper trails, paths of resilience, memory, and evolution that still echo in the journeys of humankind today. Winter, in the prehistoric world, was not only a season of hardship, but also a season of ritual. When nights stretched longer than days and the cold pressed against every cave wall, survival depended not only on food, fire, and shelter, but on belief. To endure, early humans turned to ritual, acts that wove meaning into suffering, courage into fear, and hope into despair. Winter rituals became the heartbeat of prehistoric life, marking the passage of time, honoring the dead, and strengthening bonds among the living. In these ceremonies, people found renewal even in the harshest months, proving that survival was as much spiritual as it was physical. One of the most common rituals centered on fire. Flames were more than warmth, they were sacred. In the longest nights of winter, families gathered around the blaze, feeding it with wood, bone, or even animal fat, whispering chants as sparks flew upward. Fire was treated as a living presence, a companion that needed to be cared for, respected, and honored. Some groups left offerings at the edge of flames, scraps of meat, carved figurines, or painted stones, as gestures of gratitude and requests for protection. To let the fire die in winter was more than a mistake. It was an act of negligence toward a spiritual ally. Death, an ever-present reality in the cold months, demanded ritual as well. Burials were not hurried affairs, even when survival pressed heavily upon the living. Graves were dug into frozen earth or shallow caves, bodies painted with red ochre, a symbol of blood, life, and rebirth. Beads, animal bones, and tools were laid alongside the dead, as if equipping them for a journey into another world. These acts transformed loss into continuity, soothing the living with the belief that their loved ones pass into a realm beyond winter's reach. For children, watching such rituals taught reverence for life and respect for the unseen. Winter solstices were turning points that prehistoric groups likely marked with significance. The longest night carried both fear and promise. Fear of the darkness that seemed eternal, and promise of the sun's slow return. Some archaeologists believe alignments of stones, carved symbols, and cave paintings were tied to solstice rituals. Fires may have been lit in special ceremonies, chants rising into the frozen sky to call back the light. For a people whose survival depended on the rhythms of nature, acknowledging this cosmic cycle was not optional but essential. It was reassurance that winter, however harsh, would yield to spring. Hunting itself carried ritual dimensions in winter. Before a dangerous hunt for mammoth or bison, shamans or elders might perform ceremonies to honor the spirits of animals. Hunters painted their bodies with ash, blood, or ochre, carried charms of bone or tooth, and invoked chants for luck. After a successful kill, parts of the animal were sometimes burned in offering, acknowledging that life had been taken and gratitude must be shown. These rituals were not mere superstition. They reinforced respect for prey and reminded hunters of the balance between taking and giving, life and death. Rituals also helped manage fear and uncertainty. When storms howled outside caves, when food ran thin, and when predators circled in the dark, rituals provided structure. Singing, drumming on hollow logs, or carving symbols into stone turned chaos into order. By repeating familiar acts, people reassured themselves that they control, however small, over forces beyond their grasp. Ritual was survival psychology, a way to steady minds when reality felt overwhelming. Winter rituals often emphasize community. Shared feasts, however modest, were acts of solidarity. Families gathered to eat together, not only to share nourishment, but also to reinforce bonds. Songs and dances, echoing in firelit caves, were not only entertainment but expressions of identity. In these moments, hunger and cold were softened by laughter, rhythm, and unity. Ritual gave people reasons to look beyond their own suffering and see themselves as part whole. Shamans, spiritual leaders of tribes, played a central role in these rituals. They were believed to walk between worlds, the living and the spirit, the visible and the unseen. In winter, their role became even more vital. Shamans interpreted dreams, healed sickness with herbs and chants, and guided ceremonies to keep despair at bay. Dressed in furs, feathers, or animal skulls, they embodied symbols of transformation. When the tribe faced famine or disease, it was the shaman's ritual that renewed hope, reminding everyone that the spirit was as resilient as the body. Children, too, were woven into winter rituals. They learned chants by repetition, pressed their tiny handprints onto cave walls, and listened wide-eyed to stories of spirits and ancestors. Ritual became their education in resilience, teaching them that survival was not just about strength, but also about belonging to a chain of memories stretching backward and forward in time. In this way, rituals ensured that culture endured even when individuals did not. Winter also intensified the relationship between humans and the natural world. The sight of the aurora dancing across the night sky, the eerie silence of snow-covered forests, or the growl of a storm became moments of awe. Rituals were responses to these forces. Songs sung to sky, offerings left at stones, prayers whispered into the wind. Humans understood themselves as part of nature, not above it. By engaging in ritual, they aligned with the rhythms of the world rather than resisting them blindly. The emotional weight of ritual cannot be overstated. Imagine a family grieving the loss of a child to illness. In the cold silence, despair could shatter unity. But through ritual, painting the child's body, singing chants, lighting torches, the tribe transformed grief into remembrance, despair into endurance. Ritual gave sorrow form, allowing people to process pain without being destroyed by it. It kept the fire of meaning alive, even as the fire of life flickered out. In the end, winter rituals were survival stories written not on hides or stone, but in memory and practice. They turned the terror of darkness into ceremonies of light, the fear of death into continuity, and the struggle of survival into a shared journey. While spears, clothing, and fire kept bodies alive, rituals kept spirits unbroken. Together, they allowed prehistoric humans not only to endure winter, but to rise from it renewed, ready for spring's promise. The Ice Age was more than a season of hardship. It was a crucible where belief and endurance fused. Every chant, every offering, every grave painted in red ochre testified to humanity's refusal to surrender to the cold. Rituals of winter were not idle acts. They were lifelines of soul, carrying people through the bleakest months with meaning as essential as food. And in those rituals, early humans discovered a truth that echoes even now. Survival is not only about enduring the world outside, but also about sustaining the world within. The story of humanity's struggle against the Ice Age does not end with the thawing of glaciers or the fading of mammoths from the frozen plains. Its echoes continue into our own lives, shaping who we are and how we think. Even in a world where central heating, insulated homes, and global trade promise comfort, the lessons carved into the bones of our prehistoric ancestors are not relics of the past. They are living truths about resilience, adaptability, and the balance between fragility and strength. To understand the legacy of Ice Age survival is to recognize that the foundations of modern humanity were built in the frozen crucible of those winters long ago. At its core, the Ice Age taught us that survival is never solitary. Cavemen who endured winter did so not as isolated hunters, but as families and bands bound together. Shared food, shared fire, and shared rituals turned small groups into enduring communities. In the modern world, where individualism often takes center stage, the prehistoric lesson is clear. Survival, whether against freezing winds or global crises, is built upon cooperation. The same instinct that drew people together in caves now drives our cities, our institutions, and even our families. It is a knowledge that together, people can outlast storms that would consume them alone. The Ice Age also revealed the human genius for innovation. Faced with endless cold, early humans did not simply endure, they invented. They dug sleeping pits, stitched furs with bone needles, carved tools from flint, and eventually painted their lives into cave walls. Each adaptation was a small victory against extinction. Today, our technologies are more complex, but the impulse is the same. Climate challenges, resource scarcity, and natural disasters continue to demand creativity. The Ice Age reminds us that innovation is not luxury. It is necessity, born from pressure, honed by need, and driven by the will to survive. But the legacy of Ice Age survival is not only about tools and shelters. It is about mindset. Early humans lived with constant awareness of risk. A single mistake, letting a fire die, misjudging a hunt, leaving a child unprotected, could bring death. This awareness sharpened their senses, heightened their caution, and deepened their respect for the forces of nature. In today's world, where technology cushions us, we often forget this humility before the environment. Yet as climate change reshapes our world, the old wisdom becomes relevant again. Humans cannot dominate nature. They must learn to live with it, adapt to it, and respect its power. The Ice Age also left us the legacy of ritual and meaning. In caves, under the glow of firelight, humans painted animals, traced handprints, and buried their dead with ochre and beads. These acts were not simply aesthetic. They were survival strategies for the spirit. They turned despair into hope, chaos into order, and death into continuity. In our modern world of technology and rapid change, we still crave rituals, whether through cultural traditions, holidays, or simple family routines. The prehistoric lesson is that meaning is as vital as food. Without it, survival becomes empty endurance. With it, even suffering can be transformed into growth. Another lasting lesson is the art of resourcefulness. Ice Age humans did not have abundance. They scavenged marrow from bones, boiled hides for broth, and used every part of the animals they hunted. Waste was not an option. In today's age of overconsumption, this lesson is urgent. The resourcefulness of cavemen is a reminder that sustainability is not a modern invention, but an ancient instinct. The difference is that prehistoric people practiced it out of necessity, while we must now practice it by choice, to preserve not only our survival, but the survival of the planet. The Ice Age also shaped the emotional core of humanity. Fear of winter nights, joy at a successful hunt, sorrow in the face of death, and relief at the return of spring. All of these emotions were magnified in the frozen world. Over generations, they sculpted the human psyche into what it is today. Cautious yet hopeful, anxious yet resilient, vulnerable yet strong. The echoes of those emotions remain in us. Our fear of darkness, our attraction to fire, our reverence for community, and even our seasonal rituals trace their roots to that prehistoric world. Perhaps the most profound legacy of Ice Age survival is resilience. Those who endured the endless winters carried within them the ability to adapt to hardship, to rise after loss, and to find strength in weakness. Resilience is not about never falling. It is about rising every time we fall. Cavemen buried their dead and still went hunting the next day. They lost entire herds of game to storms, but still found ways to scrape marrow from bones. This relentless perseverance became encoded in humanity's very identity. It is the reason we have survived plagues, wars, and disasters across history. The resilience learned in the Ice Age remains our inheritance. There is also a warning in this legacy. The Ice Age taught that survival often comes at the cost of other species. Mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, and giant sloths vanished, partly because of climate, partly because of hunting. Prehistoric survival was not without consequence, and that truth remains. Every choice we make to survive, whether cutting forests, burning fuel, or expanding cities, ripples outward. The lesson is clear. Survival without balance leads not to continuity, but collapse. Prehistoric humans, in their rituals and respect for animals, seem to understand this tension. We, too, must remember it. Modern humanity stands far from caves, yet the lessons of the Ice Age remain vital. Our tools may be satellites and algorithms instead of flint blades and fire, but the questions are the same. How will we survive the winters ahead, whether literal or metaphorical? How will we balance need with respect, progress with humility, and individuality with community? Cavemen, through their struggles, have already given us answers. They showed that survival requires adaptability, meaning, cooperation, and respect for the forces greater than ourselves. As we look back at the Ice Age, we are not merely studying history. We are studying a mirror. The prehistoric world reflects both our fragility and our strength. It shows us that we are creatures of memory and imagination, shaped by hardship into beings who can dream, invent, and endure. The fires they lit still burn in us, in our creativity, our families, our resilience, and our rituals. Their survival was not only for themselves, but for us, the descendants who carry their legacy forward. The Ice Age was not only a chapter in human history. It was the foundation of human identity. Every modern comfort, every story told, every innovation born, is built upon the resilience of those who huddled in caves, shared warmth, painted walls, and faced winters that seemed eternal. Their legacy whispers a message across time. Survival is not about conquering the cold, but about learning to live with it together with meaning, respect, and resilience. That is a lesson we inherit, and the one we must never forget. When storms howled outside caves, when food ran thin, and when predators circled in the dark, rituals provided structure. Singing, drumming on hollow logs, or carving symbols into stone turned chaos into order. By repeating familiar acts, people reassured themselves that they control, however small, over forces beyond their grasp. Ritual was survival psychology, a way to steady minds when reality felt overwhelming. Winter rituals often emphasized community. Shared feasts, however modest, were acts of solidarity. Families gathered to eat together, not only to share nourishment, but also to reinforce bonds. Songs and dances, echoing in firelit caves, were not only entertainment but expressions of identity. In these moments, hunger and cold were softened by laughter, rhythm, and unity. Ritual gave people reasons to look beyond their own suffering and see themselves as part of a whole. Shamans, spiritual leaders of tribes, played a central role in these rituals. They were believed to walk between worlds, the living and the spirit, the visible and the unseen. In winter, their role became even more vital. Shamans interpreted dreams, healed sickness with herbs and chants, and guided ceremonies to keep despair at bay. Dressed in furs, feathers, or animal skulls, they embodied symbols of transformation. When the tribe faced famine or disease, it was the shaman's ritual that renewed hope, reminding everyone that the spirit was as resilient as the body. Children, too, were woven into winter rituals. They learned chants by repetition, pressed their tiny handprints onto cave walls, and listened wide-eyed to stories of spirits and ancestors. Ritual became their education in resilience, teaching them that survival was not just about strength, but also about belonging to a chain of memories stretching backward and forward in time. In this way, rituals ensured that culture endured even when individuals did not. Winter also intensified the relationship between humans and the natural world. The sight of the aurora dancing across the night sky, the eerie silence of snow-covered forests, or the growl of a storm became moments of awe. Rituals were responses to these forces. Songs sung to sky, offerings left at stones, prayers whispered into the wind. Humans understood themselves as part of nature, not above it. By engaging in ritual, they align with the rhythms of the world rather than resisting them blindly. The emotional weight of ritual cannot be overstated. Imagine a family grieving the loss of a child to illness. In the cold silence, despair could shatter unity. But through ritual, painting the child's body, singing chants, lighting torches, the tribe transformed grief into remembrance, despair into endurance. Ritual gave sorrow form, allowing people to process pain without being destroyed by it. It kept the fire of meaning alive, even as the fire of life flickered out. In the end, winter rituals were survival stories written not on hides or stone, but in memory and practice. They turned the terror of darkness into ceremonies of light, the fear of death into continuity, and the struggle of survival into a shared journey. While spears, clothing, and fire kept bodies alive, rituals kept spirits unbroken, together. They allowed prehistoric humans not only to endure winter, but to rise from it renewed, ready for spring's promise. The Ice Age was more than a season of hardship. It was a crucible where belief and endurance fused. Every chant, every offering, every grave painted in red ochre testified to humanity's refusal to surrender to the cold. Rituals of winter were not idle acts. They were lifelines of soul, carrying people through the bleakest months with meaning as essential as food. And in those rituals, early humans discovered a truth that echoes even now. Survival is not only about enduring the world outside, but also about sustaining the world within.